I walked into my own celebration and within 5 minutes, my brother-in-law looked me dead in the eye and told me to get out of the way because the help shouldn't be mingling with the guests, especially a lowly plumber like me. I was standing on the deck of a multi-million-dollar yacht that I paid for with my own hard-earned money, holding a wrench because a minor leak was threatening to ruin the imported mahogany flooring. And this man had the audacity to snap his fingers at me and demand I go find him a cold beer while I finished fixing the pipe. He didn't realize that the plumber he was mocking didn't just fix the tap. He owned the entire vessel, the crew, and the very ground he was standing on. Was I wrong for letting him embarrass himself in front of the most influential people in the city, before I finally pulled the rug out from under him? Or would you have humbled him the second he opened his mouth? I really need you to hear this entire story because it's not just about a rude relative. It's about years of being looked down upon by a family that thought money was the only measure of a man's soul. Let's go back a bit so you can understand the dynamic here because this didn't start on the water. My name is Mark, and I've spent the last 15 years building a specialized industrial maintenance company. I'm not talking about unclogging toilets in suburban basements. I'm talking about high-end, complex systems for luxury estates and commercial skyscrapers. I'm comfortable getting my hands dirty, and I actually enjoy the mechanical side of things, but my wife's family, the Millers, always saw me as nothing more than a blue-collar worker who got lucky. Her brother, David, is the worst of them. David is a consultant, which is code for living off a trust fund and pretending to be a high-powered executive. He wears $3,000 suits to brunch and talks about market fluctuations, while I'm usually in a polo shirt and work boots. To him, if you don't work in a glass office, you're invisible. My wife, Sarah, has always been my rock, but she's often caught in the middle. Her parents adore David because he fits their image of success. Even though I'm the one who secretly paid off their mortgage 3 years ago through an anonymous gift, so they wouldn't feel small. They have no idea how much I actually make, and frankly, I preferred it that way, until the yacht. The tension had been building for years at every Thanksgiving dinner, and every Christmas morning. David would sit at the head of the table, swirling a glass of expensive scotch that I probably bought for him, talking down to me about the global economy, while I'd just finished a 60-hour week ensuring a hospital's backup water system was flawless. He'd make little snide remarks like, "So Mark, still playing with wrenches? I suppose someone has to do it, right? It's a shame you didn't have the aptitude for finance. You could have really been someone." My mother-in-law would just pat my hand and say, "Now David, Mark provides a very necessary service." As if I were the guy who picks up the trash on Tuesday mornings. It wasn't just the words, it was the way they looked at my clothes, the way they never asked about my business growth, and the way they assumed my little shop was just a few guys in a garage. In reality, I had 40 employees and a fleet of 20 trucks, but to them, I was just Sarah's fix-it husband. For my 40th birthday, I decided to treat myself. I've always loved the ocean, so I purchased a beautiful, 80-foot custom yacht. I named it the Silent Partner, as a nod to my career. I planned a huge launch party and invited Sarah's entire family, but I wanted the focus to be on the celebration, not the price tag. I told them we'd be hosting a party on a chartered boat. I didn't say it was mine. I just said I'd arranged everything. On the day of the event, I arrived early to make sure the catering was perfect. While checking the galley, I noticed the faucet in the wet bar was dripping steadily. It was a quick fix, and since I had my toolkit in the car, I grabbed a wrench to tighten the valve myself rather than waiting for a technician. I was hunched over under the sink, sleeves rolled up, grease on my forearm, when I heard David's voice behind me. He had arrived early with his new girlfriend, a woman named Chloe who looked like she'd never stepped foot on anything less than a private jet. "Oh look, Sarah's husband is actually doing something useful for once," David sneered. I looked up, wiped my forehead, and started to explain, but he didn't let me finish. He laughed and told his girlfriend that I was the family's handyman, and that it was cute how I was trying to save the charter company some money by doing the repairs myself. He actually called me a plumber with such a tone of disgust that it felt like a slur. He told me to hurry up because he didn't want the smell of work lingering when the important guests arrived. I just went back to the tap, a slow burn starting in my chest. I could hear them whispering as they walked away. David telling her that Sarah could have done so much better if she hadn't settled for a manual laborer. Throughout the afternoon, as more guests arrived, including some of my actual business associates who knew exactly who I was, David continued the charade. He would walk by and make comments about how the help was doing a great job. He even tried to hand me a $20 bill at one point after I helped an elderly guest with their chair, telling me to buy myself a decent meal for once. Sarah saw this and was about to intervene, her face red with fury, but I caught her eye and shook my head. I had a different plan. I wanted him to climb as high as possible on his mountain of ego before I knocked it down. I watched him cornering my friend, Marcus, who owns a chain of high-end hotels. David was trying to sound sophisticated, talking about capital allocation strategies, while Marcus was literally staring at me from across the deck with a confused, "Is this guy for real?" look on his face. I just winked at Marcus and kept my head down. David was even going around the boat, criticizing the choices of the owner, saying the interior was a bit too industrial for his refined tastes, and that he would have gone with a more European aesthetic. He had no clue he was insulting my personal design choices to my face. He even had the nerve to walk into the captain's quarters and try to tell him how to navigate the coastal waters, claiming he'd spent summers in the Hamptons and knew the currents better than a professional. Captain Elias just looked at him with a blank expression, waiting for me to give the signal to throw him overboard, but I wasn't done yet. I watched him all evening. He was acting like he owned the place, telling people which wines were the best and bragging about how he'd helped scout this boat for the party. He was even trying to pitch a partnership to one of my biggest clients, Mr. Henderson, who was looking at David with a mixture of confusion and pity. David had no idea that Mr. Henderson and I had closed a $10 million deal just the month before. It was reaching a boiling point, and I realized I was at a crossroads. I could let this go and keep my peace, or I could make sure David never looked down on a plumber ever again. So that's where I was, standing on the edge of my own deck, watching this man disrespect me in my own home while I held the power to end his entire reputation with a single sentence. Before I tell you how I handled the big reveal and the look on his face when the captain finally stepped in, I want you to pause right now. What would you do? Would you keep the secret to stay humble, or would you burn it all down to teach him a lesson? Tell me in the comments, because I really struggled with this choice. I decided it was time for the plumber to clock out and the owner to clock in. I went to the stateroom, cleaned up, and changed into a tailored linen suit I had stashed away. I walked back out onto the deck, just as David was loudly complaining to the captain about the temperature of the champagne. "Excuse me, Captain," David barked. "This vintage is slightly warm. Can you have the maintenance boy, what's his name, Mark? Go get some more ice." The captain, a stern man named Elias who had been with me for months, looked at David, then looked at me, and his eyebrows shot up. I gave him a subtle nod. "Actually, sir," the captain said, his voice projecting across the entire deck so everyone could hear, "I take orders only from the owner of this vessel." David scoffed. "Well, obviously. Where is he? I'll speak to him myself. This charter is costing a fortune and the service is lacking." The captain stepped aside and gestured toward me. "The owner is standing right in front of you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Mark is the sole proprietor of this yacht, and the head of the company that manages our fleet." The silence that followed was so heavy you could have anchored the boat with it. David's glass literally slipped from his hand, shattering on the deck. His girlfriend looked like she wanted to melt into the floorboards. I walked over, stood right in his personal space, and picked up the $20 bill he'd dropped earlier. I tucked it into his breast pocket and whispered, "Keep it, David. You're going to need it when I tell my firm to stop consulting with your boutique agency on Monday morning." The color drained from his face until he was practically gray. My mother-in-law gasped, and the realization hit the entire family at once. The man they had treated like a second-class citizen for a decade was the most successful person in the room. I didn't stop there. I turned to my in-laws and said, "I hope the mortgage payments are still being handled okay? I noticed the anonymous benefactor who paid off your house hasn't heard a thank you yet, but I suppose that's because you were too busy worrying about David's career." Their mouths fell open. They hadn't realized that the handyman was the one keeping their roof over their heads. The shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous. People who had spent the whole night ignoring me were suddenly trying to shove their business cards into my hand. My father-in-law tried to laugh it off, saying they always knew I was a smart cookie, but the look in my eyes told him that the game was over. I didn't want their fake praise now that they knew I had money. I wanted them to realize that I was the same person 5 minutes ago, when I was holding that wrench. David tried to pull me aside to talk man to man, but I just walked away. I spent the rest of the night talking to my actual friends, the people who respected me when I was in my work boots. The rest of the night was a blur of apologies and stuttered explanations. David tried to claim he was just joking, but I didn't give him an inch. I stayed polite, I stayed professional, but I made sure he knew the bridge wasn't just burned. It was vaporized. The aftermath was intense. Sarah was proud of me for finally standing up, and her parents have been tripping over themselves to be nice to us ever since. Though things will never be the same. They send us gifts now, and they always ask my opinion on their financial matters, but I keep them at arm's length. David, on the other hand, lost his biggest contract because, as it turns out, word spreads fast when you insult the guy who owns the room. My firm was providing 80% of his billable hours through referrals, and I cut that tap off faster than the leak I fixed in the galley. He's currently looking for a real job, and I heard he's struggling because he doesn't actually have any skills other than talking. Last I heard, he was trying to sell his luxury car just to make rent. His girlfriend left him 3 days after the party when she realized the rich consultant was actually broke. I realized that day that some people only respect you when they know what you're worth in their currency, but the only opinion that truly matters is your own. I learned that you should never be ashamed of the work you do, because the hands that fix the pipes are often the ones that build the empires. If people want to call you a plumber, let them, just make sure you own the pipes. Like this video if you think David got exactly what he deserved, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people underestimating the wrong person. Share your thoughts on how you would have handled the family after the reveal in the comments. I'll see you all in the next story.